I'm Jack Jezreel, the Senior Advisor for Just Faith Ministries, and welcome to our late October Gathering for Justice presentation. It's good to have all of you with us. Mindful of our election next week, I thought I'd begin this evening with an excerpt from Pope Francis's new encyclical, Fratelli Tutti. You can find this quote, by the way, in the Election Day prayer service that Just Faith Ministries has created. The entire prayer service is available for free from our website. So here's the quote, which I offer as our opening reflection prayer. Good politics combines love with hope and with confidence in the reserves of goodness present in human hearts. Indeed, authentic political life, built upon respect for law and frank dialogue between individuals, is constantly renewed whenever there is a realization that every woman and man and every new generation brings the promise of new relational, intellectual, cultural, and spiritual energies. Viewed in this way, politics is something more noble than posturing, marketing, and media spin. These sow nothing but division, conflict, and oblique cynicism, incapable of mobilizing people to pursue a common goal. At times, in thinking of the future, we do well to ask ourselves, why am I doing this? What is my real aim? For as time goes on, reflecting on the past, the questions will not be, how many people endorsed me? How many voted for me? How many had a positive image of me? The real and potentially painful questions will be, how much love did I put into my work? What did I do for the progress of our people? What mark did I leave on the life of society? What real bonds did I create? What positive forces did I unleash? How much social peace did I sow? And what good did I achieve in the position that was entrusted to me? Amen. And it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight. Andy Loving has been a socially responsible financial advisor that specializes in community development investing for over 25 years. Andy is an ordained minister and social activist. He was the co-founder of the award-winning World Hunger magazine Seeds, which some of you might be familiar with. He currently owns and manages, along with his wife, Susan Taylor, the firm Just Money Advisors, that exclusively specializes in socially responsible investing. Economic justice in the United States and abroad is a deep commitment for both Andy and his wife, Susan. I'm so delighted to claim Andy as my friend, and I'm eager to share him with you this evening. So Andy, welcome.
Thank you, Jack. Okay, that's how we go. Okay, you're not going to have to worry about too many slides tonight. I just got a few, but this is what I'm going to try and talk about with you tonight, and that's doing justice with the money you don't give away. And that's, for the last 27 years, that's basically what I've tried to help people to do as both a justice activist and as a socially responsible financial planner. I help people steward their money to create social change as well as economic and climate justice. I've been a follower of Jesus for most of my 73 years, though what that means, I realize has morphed and changed more than I ever thought possible along the journey. But the journey's been good, and I'm ready for the rest of it. Now, socially responsible investing has been around, and my guess is that most of you at least have some knowledge and introduction to this. It's been around in the early 70s here in the United States when Christians who opposed the Vietnam War started a mutual fund that I'll be willing to bet that some of you have invested in, called Pax World Fund, so that they can invest in companies that reflected their values and weren't making weapons that were used in the Vietnam War. Now, socially responsible investing, it is not that difficult to understand. It basically is trying to help people to be able to invest in companies that do reflect their values. As an example today, such as renewable energy, or companies that hire and promote women and people of color, and then negative, that maybe that they don't want to invest in companies that are polluters or weapons contractors. And that's the basic idea. Now, there's been tremendous growth in this kind of investment. Now, most of this has been with publicly traded stocks, names you would know, or they're not in the portfolios. But as Jack alluded and just stated in his part, I'm not going to talk about much about that, although at the end I probably will make a few comments. That's been the part that is most well known, and that's because that's the place where people have their retirement and are concerned about it, so they're wanting to make money. A smaller part of socially responsible investing that many people don't know that much about is what Jack alluded to, is what we call community development investing, or now it's known sometimes as high impact investing. I also have to acknowledge that one of my connections to the Catholic heritage has been as the Catholic orders, sisters, were some of the first people who did socially responsible investing way back when. And they're much respected in our world for the work they have done and continue to do. And has resulted in me getting to know some folks from a couple orders around Louisville, and I really feel blessed to have had a chance to get to know them. Now, so in essence, what community development investing is trying to help us do, or we are trying to help people to do, and that is to invest in poor people and poor communities. That could be in urban America, in rural America, and around the world. Now, I was drawn to this because of my Christian faith. And so in investing in the poor, and it really is an example of what the title really said, and that is doing justice with the money you don't give away. You can go to the next slide, Leela. And this is just my contact info, and they said they'll send it out, but I just want to say at this point, before we get into some more specifics, that I'm happy to hear from you, either an email or phone, to follow up and talk. I like to do these things because I get to meet new people. So feel free to do that. Now, too long, in my opinion, well-meaning Christians have made their gifts to the work among the poor and left it at that. And the reality is, the need out there is just way too much for us to leave it at that. And finding ways of investing so that you can do two things at the same time with your money. And that is it can do whatever it might be. It might be safe savings. It could be in your IRA for retirement. It could be in your bank for the money you do to pay your bills. But the reality is, I think with the blessings that we have and the money we have, what we can do is we can, if we will learn and be willing to do some things new, we can open up new pots of money in our lives that we really hadn't considered could be stuff to do work of the kingdom. And that's what I want to explore with you tonight, to give you some ways, and at least to begin to even open to the possibility of start using the money you don't give away to continue to be God's people. And there are billions of dollars that are sitting out there that literally could be doing that work, but folks have just not said that have not been able to come to the reality is that what we give away and what we gift as Christians is only one part of what we can do to use our resources. And I'm going to focus a little bit on what Jack said as we're going to talk about some of the things specifically as it relates in community investing and impact investing, as it relates to the issues around Black Lives Matter and people of color, to give specific examples of things that we can do as it relates to doing that. And where I want to start, and if you can go to the next slide, Leila, is where do you bank? And this question doesn't get asked in church very much. In other words, I know that the reality is this. When you go into a bank and make a deposit and open an account, you are taking a measure of power and handing it over to that institution. So we as Christians should be knowing, what is that bank doing with that power that I'm giving them? And does that, what they are doing, does it really reflect my values as a Christian and what I would like to see them doing? Now, the reality is, when I talk to people about this, what most people say is where do you bank and how do you choose? They say, well, it's what's convenient. Where's the closest? What's the best rates? Do they have the services that I want? But the reality is, banking and the deposit of banks can be a deep resource for the poor, that our money can be. And that is, what is the kind of bank you do? Now, one of the resources I would really hope you would explore that's there are two websites. One, I'm happy to say, is one that my firm has developed called betterbankingoptions.com, which is on the screen. And then mightydeposits.com is another one. And both of them basically identify banks that do what? That basically locate in poor in working class neighborhoods so that people can actually have a branch near them that they can work on, where they can put their money for themselves. But then also that the main things that they do are things that help poor people. And those things are banks that, one, make loans to poor people to buy a home. Buying of a home is one of the best ways that people of color can begin to establish a home. And when you begin to read about our history, is that people of color who came back from even the Second World War, where they were supposed to have GI benefits, were not allowed to buy homes. And that was the beginning of all the stuff you hear about, that they have not been able to build wealth, because buying a home and having a home is one of the ones. But our government purposefully and with much thought began to do what we call redlining, and would not let people of color and veterans come back. And that continued for much, much longer than we hoped. Now, the other thing is that the other one is small business loans. So these two Better Banking Options and Mighty Deposits will help you find banks in your area that do those things, that are there. And you say, well, and the other one thing I would say is if you have money at Chase, Citi, Wells Fargo, or Bank of America, you of course have money in one of the largest of the four largest banks. They were the main culprits back in 2008 and 2009 during the mortgage meltdown. But the reality is, they now today control more assets than they did back in 2008 and 2009, when they basically showed that they were much more interested and maximizing profit than they were in the people that they whose money they had. So the first thing I can say is that if you have money there, my recommendation is dollar for dollar, you're not even close, that there are many banks out there. Now, do they do some lending and stuff? Yes, they do. But their job is not to serve, their job is to maximize profits for shareholders, and never forget that. So in some sense, what the bank is, just even think of it in some ways as a common purse for the community, because people take it there. And then the question is, what does the bank do with the money in your community as far as really helping the community in which you live? So these banks, the four banks that are listed below, Hope Credit Union is a black run and majority black credit union that's based in Jackson, Mississippi. Optus Bank is a wonderful black-owned, black-run bank in Columbia, South Carolina. Self-Help Credit Union is a great credit union in North Carolina, and Self-Help Federal Credit Union is their sister organization that has branches all over California and in Milwaukee and some places in Chicago. And these all four are what we call community development financial institutions. And that's a designation. And what CDFIs are, when you see that affiliated with a bank, and you can even, on both of the websites, you can find if the bank that you're looking at is a CDFI. Now, that doesn't mean that every bank that's not a CDFI isn't any good, and that may be the one that you end up doing. But if it is CDFI, you could be sure, because it has to be able to prove that the majority of the people they serve are in poor and working class neighborhoods and are themselves that. The issue, as an example of what difference does it make? To give you an example, Hope Credit Union listed there, which serves Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, and Western Tennessee. Last year, we talked about, you can see, well, how do we know? Last year, in their impact report, they reported that of all of the mortgages that they gave out last year to people buying homes, 91% of those people were first-time home buyers. So you begin to see that if you put your money here, it's going to make a difference. And I would just, invite you to look at those four banks' websites, learn what they do. Basically, Hope Credit Union, I'll tell a little bit more about them, just because Hope serves the area along the Mississippi River that back in 1860 was where the most dense slavery was, the number of slaves. The reality is that the same areas that had slavery now are still predominantly, for the last 50 years, have been the highest density of persistent poverty counties and black counties still. So that to put money at Hope Credit Union. Now, one of the other things in thinking about some other places, maybe you can't find someplace close to you, but the reality is that all of these banks have online banking, so that you could put some money there, even if you can't put all of your banking money there, or there's not one in your city or in your area. So then the reality is now, if you really want to, there's almost all banks in this country you can do electronically. I personally bank at Self-Help Credit Union in Durham, North Carolina. Now, we have another little account here that we use in case we need money. Sometimes people, when we begin to tell them doing things like that, they say, oh, that's too much trouble. Well, that's just, I just want need to be convenient. Well, Jesus never promised that doing justice would be convenient. So in some sense, we have to be able to look at what it means to do justice. We think of that as feeding the hungry, going to demonstrations, all kinds of different things. And what I'm trying to say tonight is how we use the money we don't give away also has to become a way where we can say, this is how I do justice. And that is to put the money into institutions that serve very poor people. Now, the other question before we leave this, and no, we don't need to go on. Before we go here, the other question I would ask you is not just the question of where do you bank, but the question is, where does your church bank? And where does the diocese bank? And begin to ask questions. I know that, as an example, I just saw in a paper in South Carolina that some Black churches in Charleston have made a pact among themselves to move money out of their mainline banks and at least put a certain percentage of their money into Black-owned banks or banks that serve people of color predominantly. All four of those do. They're either Black-owned, Black-controlled, or a large percentage of the people that they own are people of color. So in some sense, the other question I think we have to begin to ask is, what do our institutions do with their money? And are they thinking about that, or are they just thinking about where can they get the best rates? Where can they, is it easier for the treasurer of the diocese to be able to do things? Again, then the question is, can we begin to put pressure at least for some money to go to banking institutions so that in some sense you're doing that? As an example, what happened is, I don't know if any of you have read about this, but Hope Credit Union, Netflix, in their desire to support Black Lives Matter, it's a long story short, began to look for institutions that they thought deserved Black controlled and run institutions. Hope Credit Union got a $10 million deposit from Netflix. So this is corporate America that's making the decision that they're at least going to try to do something to put capital into Black institutions. If they can do it, I think the church should be able to do it as well. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Then the other thing is here's an example of where you can, it's an investment. It's a mutual fund. Probably most of you have a mutual fund in your IRA or something else. This is called the CRA Qualified Fund. The CRA stands for Community Reinvestment Act. And some of you may know the Community Reinvestment Act was created to stop redlining. And what this is a mutual fund that when you invest in it, you invest in nothing but affordable housing. Large percentage, of course, of that affordable housing is people of color. So in some sense, and this is a mutual fund that is at a high rating, you can invest in it with as little as $1,000, and you can invest in it in most brokerage accounts, at Charles Schwab, at Fidelity, at big brokerage houses. Those things underneath on the screen, CRATX and CRANX, are if you go to your broker or your financial planner, that's what you take and say, I want to invest there. They have for the longest time, it's now $2 billion in size. And some of it are people with just a few $1,000s, and some are a lot more. They have invested since 1999 when they began, and I'm lucky enough to say I was one of their first advisors to begin working with. They've invested over $10 billion in high impact areas with tons and tons of people of color getting benefit of that. This is a place, and this is, lots of you probably have a mortgage fund in your investments. Well, here's a mortgage fund where you can know that, again, just like we said, we're going to try and find ways where we can invest in people of color and poor folk and working class folks. So in some sense, that's another example of where we can do it, and that is in your investments. And I'm just touching, there's a lot more than this. This is just these are just some examples. So in some sense, you'll have to start looking out for community investing and start doing some work. This is some things where we have to learn, and we have to keep changing and doing some things. Now, the next slide, there we go. Calvert Impact Capital. Now, I'm sure probably some of you have heard of Calvert. Calvert is also a mutual fund family. That was one of the first families in 1982 to divest from South Africa and have a mutual fund where you could be divested from South Africa. Again, some of the first real strong work in regards to, what was the beginnings of Black Lives Matter was the divestment movement out of South Africa. Well, they created a nonprofit that for a long time was called Calvert Foundation, and now it's changed its name to Calvert Impact Capital. And its name really kind of tells you what it does, and that it takes in investments of all kinds of sizes from folks, and one of the major things they do is affordable housing, and they do small business loans. Again, what we said before. What are the things that begin to create wealth in neighborhoods and in people of color? And so they are doing lots of this. And again, right now, you can get a 5-year note from Calvert Impact Capital that's kind of like a CD. And you know that because of interest rates and COVID, things are really low right now. But you can get a 5-year note that pays 2.5%, which is better than you can get on almost any CD that I know of. So it's not a lot of money, but it's some money, and better and as good as you can in a conservative investment. You can hold these directly with Calvert. You can buy them online with as little as $20. And again, they do small business. One of the other things that they do is they're the ones that where we put a lot of money. We have over $6 million of our client money at Calvert Impact Capital. They've been doing this for 28 years. It's not FDIC insured, but for 28 years, they've been loaning and have loaned over $100 million out. And they've got now a lot more than that. That's low. I forgot. I got my number wrong here. I know I do. And that is some of you probably heard of microfinance. And microfinance is making very small loans to very poor people who cannot get loans from any institution at any price, and enables them to perhaps help buy a piece of land, may be able to help them to rent a stall at the local market, or to buy some chickens that they can raise and then sell eggs, or and sell some of the eggs and eat them themselves. And again, microfinance is also focused in poor countries in Africa, and microfinance even now is done here in the United States for very small loans for very small little businesses. And but they also work with all kinds of other things. They do with senior housing. They work with cooperatives, all kinds of things. But they are just one of the, you can even have it if you're at Schwab or Fidelity, you can even put it in your IRA. And so you can talk to if you have an advisor or stuff, you can do it there. And again, this is also with the IRAs. This is money that you maybe are saving for your grandkids for college in an account, or for your retirement, for other needs. You can do these with part of the money and begin to have that money doing two things at once. It's helping you do what you need, and begin to think about how many millions of dollars of other people of faith are out there who don't know that they can do this, and be able to begin to say, okay, we can do lots of other things with our money. And so Calvert Impact Capital is just another way, as little as $20. You can do it directly with them too. Again, sometimes most of the places, but again, $1,000, just like CRA, you don't have to be a millionaire to do it. And it does make a difference. Now, those three are just examples of what can happen in our institutions. They're not the only ones. I'm trying to think of who the people. Oh yeah, and I forgot your name, but I know it, like in San Francisco and some other places. San Francisco's got some great banks. Beneficial State Bank in Oakland. They're all over the place. So if you'll get on the Better Banking Options websites, you can begin to find banks if you're in California, Self-Help Federal Credit Union is also in the Bay Area, and also now almost all over California, Southern California, Northern California, lots of different places. So that there are CDFIs, Community Development Financial Institutions, all over the place. Calvert Impact Capital you can buy in almost any place, any mini brokerage house now out there. Same thing with the CRA fund. So that there are ways now that you can do it. One of the other things that I want to at least mention, we focus now on people of color and Black Lives Matter, but we also know that in our world today, another justice that is out there that has to happen is climate justice. And it's also, the reality is, if you go on and look at it and know about people of color in our country, the reality is, as issues around pollution and toxic waste dumps and those kind of things is also a place and where people of color are more negatively impacted than any of us as a group. So when we think of Black Lives Matter, as an example here in Louisville, where Breonna Taylor was killed, she lives in the West End. Well, the West End is home to a bunch of rubber plants and other things that became toxic. So where is the worst of the pollution and the problems with those kinds of issues in Louisville? Of course, it's in the West Louisville where Black folks live. That's not just true in Louisville, Kentucky. So one of the other things that I just wanted to at least mention to you, again, that we can talk a little bit about is climate justice. And if you can go on to the next one. This is just to give you a couple examples of places where people can invest in renewable energy that, again, will help us deal with this. Renewable energy, Greenback Renewable Energy is not a publicly traded company, and you have to have a certain level of assets, but it's a good example of how private money, and again, money that you can, this one, the return on it is market rate, so it can be even better. So again, money can do two things at once. It's just an example. Right now, it's even great because it's not publicly traded, so it's not been subject to some of the volatility of private because of COVID. But what does it do? It's basically just a company that buys, owns, and operates solar and wind farms and installations. And how do they make change? The reality is that right now in some states, and in lots of states, in fact, is that utilities are being forced to have to begin to use more renewable energy. And they don't have the experience of saying, where are we going to get renewable energy? Well, Greenbacker is one of the places where they can go and get that renewable energy. And the reality is, so that investments in this are being a part of the process in renewable energy that's pushing renewable energy down the line. And people like you and like me are doing it. And right now it's distributing. It has over 227 installations. It's almost $1 billion in size. 2/3 of it is solar, 1/3 is wind, and they're distributing monthly for the investors in this at 6.4% annual. Again, market rate returns, but it can do two things at the same time. If you can't do this, there are also, you can ask if you do it, there are renewable energy solar companies and stuff that you can find out about, so that there are ways in which you can deal with climate justice, which specifically and negatively impacts people of color more than anybody else, to be able to do that. So that's one. And then one other thing is just that on a more, that relates to that's on a more regular, a regular investment is that I'm sure you've heard about fossil fuel free. And that is that there has been a significant move of people saying, I want to invest where I'm not investing in fossil fuels. And this website can help you tell you about not only fossil free funds, but also whether they're good on other stuff too, like some of the other streams that we talked about. So this is a place where you can do mutual funds. And you say, part of this is people say, well, what difference is if I use my little bit of money? Well, there are colleges, there are state universities, there are pension plans. And back when South Africa divestment was going on, people said, oh, this will never make any difference, never make any difference at all. And the reality is, Mandela, when he got out of jail, said, if it hadn't been for that divestment, we would still not be where we are to make South Africa free. And so the reality is that, again, divestment is another way in which we can use the money we don't give away to begin to do things that have social change impact. So these are just, we don't have enough time to go into all the different ones, but there are just some examples and those of things that you can look at and begin to educate yourself, begin to try and see if you can get the diocese or somebody to create a committee to begin to do some education for churches where you are, and begin to make sure that poor people overseas begin to get access to even a little bit of money. We can't fathom what it's like overseas that you can't get a loan of any kind at any price. So that's that. So now, at this point, I'm going to tell you a couple of stories, and then we can, and I'll shut down. I don't know where I am, but I'm about the end of my stuff here. But one of the things is that I would invite you to do, and really encourage you. My experience in working with white churches, just put it out there, and affluent white churchgoers, who many of them are highly educated, and that's me, and I had to deal with this, and probably Jack told me some secrets and said that that's a lot of you. Is the reality is that, at least what I've gone through with a lot of people, is what I call the paralysis of analysis. And that is we want to study one more book. We want to clarify one more thing about this or that. But I'm just saying is that what I would encourage you to do is to take this, call me, find something that you feel like I can do this, and act. I think we don't have to wait till we know it all. In fact, you probably have the resources from your experience of working at Just Faith, as you probably heard about the action reflection model of based communities in Latin America. Jack, have they heard that before?
I'm sure a lot of them have. Yes, Sandy.
So, but basically then, yes, to take an action and then reflect on that action and then to go on to the next action. So that take one of these things and begin to try and find out enough to where you can put something in your IRA, or you can you can find a new bank to put money in. You can do something to begin to try and act. Take your money away from your mega bank and find a local community bank that's focusing on making small business loans and housing loans in your community. And so what I want to do now is I want to tell you a little bit of story about a small church community that began to learn about some of these things and decided to act. And it was I won't name the community, but it's here in Louisville. And it was several years ago. This little church has about 60 people on Sunday morning. When they did this, their budget was about $60,000 a year. The sanctuary of this church kind of reminded you of like an old inner city machine shop. And that's because it was an inner city machine shop. And this community lived across the street from a big housing project. And it saw itself as a poor church. And at one point, though, they learned about this microfinance idea. And actually, with the Calvert Foundation, they began to say, what could we do if we would take some of the money we can't give because we need it for something later, and began to try and put it together just like the common purse from Acts in the Bible, and see how much we can come up with to begin to do some things with money we just never thought of as a way where we could do justice or do ministry. And so what they did is they did just that. There's a way at Calvert where what they did is they put the money into accounts in their name. And for those people who didn't have enough money, the church opened one account so we could take kids. We even had kids who put their college money in to this, and then later got it out to be able to go on to college. So they did use it for two things. And what happened is that, again, this little church didn't have any idea of whether they'd be able to do anything or how much they'd get. Remember, they had $60,000 for their full budget for the whole year. And they began to, what they did is just reported back to a committee about how much they had put in their own name. And after a month or two, they were able to report back to the church that they had raised $25,000. Again, still in their name, still having it set aside for doing what they needed to have done later for whatever it was, their retirement, college, whatever. It was at 25,000, then it was at 50,000, then it was at 75,000, it was at 100, 150, and it topped out at about $175,000 with a church who thought it was poor, who only had $60,000 that they could afford to give away to be able to do that they could give away. But they had $175,000 out there that they thought, well, I need this for savings, or I need this in my bank, or I need this, but who could do it at the same time. And who began to think, and who, as I heard the story, began to think, this is a little church of 60 people. And they were able to, when they began to look around at where can we put this money, not give it away because I'm going to need it later or in another situation, or in case it's an emergency that I can get to it. And they basically came up with 3 times their annual budget to be able to put it into microfinance that ended up being able to provide almost 5,000 or 6,000 loans to poor people overseas to begin to change their lives. And if that one little church could do it, can we imagine? That's why I say there's billions of dollars sitting in accounts out there, because we can't be creative enough to figure out we can do more than one thing with a lot of our money. Now, and the other thing I think it's important for us to remember is I hope that as you go through this process of trying to begin to act, that you'll begin to in some way try to find some people to act with you and act as a community. That's what this church did. I think it made all the difference for them. They did it as a community, and they reported how many families or how many households were participating and how much have we done. And still, there are people in that church who have money in that microfinance, and there's no telling how much it is. We just haven't become creative enough to be able to do those things. Lots of people of color, if we put money into banks, lots of people of color if we put into affordable housing like CRA fund. Lots of people of color would be served if we went to the Calvert Foundation, began to put some of our money in. And without having, and you saying, I can't give more. Well, you can give more, but just in a different way. And I think that just at the end here, there's a quote from an English churchman that just really has stuck with me. And I think this is how I'll leave it before we begin to try and interact. And this English churchman, he wrote this, and I read it, and I've always remembered it. And he said, the most that the average Christian can do is to take hold of the near edge of a great world problem and act at some cost to himself or herself. And I think that in this case, that's what. Now, and he didn't really say it, but I want to go back and say, and together we need to act at cost for support and help to find new ways where we can do more with what we have that we don't think we can use for more than one thing. And so I'm done. Well, with this part.
Well, thanks, Andy. We've got a bunch of good questions. So let me pitch a few to you if you don't mind.
Sure.
They're all over the place, so they're really interesting. Here's a comment with a question. This person writes, as an advisor, do you recommend that individuals invest all of their savings, retirement and otherwise, in community investment banks and mutual funds? which sort of begs the question of return on investment that individuals can expect.
And the answer,
Go ahead. Yeah, no. Yeah, please.
The answer is no, because most of the time I'm what's called, as an advisor, I'm what's called a fiduciary. And so I have to keep the interest of my client I have to think of that. But the reality is that every client usually can and feels comfortable with doing some. And so that's what, although I do have some people who's used some things like Greenbacker that pays more, and we've done where they've said, yes, I've got enough where I will try and put much more. And so they may end up with 50 or 60% of their in it because they have other money. So I can't say that, no, I don't, most people don't. But the reality is that, if we can find people in their savings, they've got $250,000 and they can put 10% into some kind of community investing, then that's $25,000 that they can do something with that they didn't think they would be able to do anything with other than do their retirement. So again, it has to be done, with the person's own specific special situation to make a decision. Some people, in retirement end up and say, well, I have a pension and my Social Security, and I'm not spending all of that. Well, then some people have been in positions where they could put big chunks of their retirement in that, into community investments of one kind or another. Or they put some into community investments and some into some fossil fuel free mutual funds that make just as much as traditional mutual funds. So again, each person's specific situation will probably indicate a different solution that will be a little different from the other person.
And Andy, related to your question, where might people go to find somebody like you who's in their hometown? Is there a resource that you can recommend?
Well, what I can say is Google. In other words, use socially responsible investment. Google socially responsible investment in the San Francisco Bay Area. There's tons of them in the Bay Area. There's people around DC. The other thing is, and I'm not looking for new clients, I'm an old man and I don't need more new ones, but I've got a young guy who does and who's working with me. But in other words, what I'm saying is that I work with people in 28 different states, and a lot of other people do too. So I mean, one of the things you can do is, if you try to find it, I can't help everybody, but if you really have trouble and you really want to do this, that's what the phone number and the email are there for, and I'll help you. The other thing is, my guess is also some of you may belong to an organization called Green America. Okay, I see at least one head shaking yes. They put out a book every year that's got green financial advisors listed in that book. So that may be one you just didn't realize that it was in there. But there are places, but you can Google it and people will come up and Google for it in your town or look around, or find somebody who will work and can work with people at a distance. And there are a lot more out there. The one thing that I would say, and this is where I would say, is if you do this, social investing has gotten much, much more popular. And so now a lot of people who, if you talk to them about justice, and they'd say, what? So be careful, and there are a lot of, if you want to find, the other thing is that, like with Calvert Foundation and all these places and those banks and stuff, and CRA Fund and your brokers and stuff, they'll help you. you can call them. Calvert will help you. But what I would ask is, there are a lot of people who say, oh yeah, I can help you with social investing. But if you start talking to them about impact investing, now they'll know some of these things, but a lot of people who do social investing now, they say, well, I don't make very much money, because I don't make very much money on social investing, on the community investments, because they don't make a lot. So, but I make enough on the other stuff to where I can afford to do this. But the questions I would ask of people, if you go to a financial advisor who says they can help you do social, and specifically I'd ask them, can you do community investing and high impact investing? And can you help me with the one that most people would know more than any other would be Calvert Impact Capital. So if you're looking for a first step, that would be a great one, because you can also do it with not very much money. But if you talk to an advisor, ask them 3 questions. How much of your money is in socially screened investments? And do you have any money in Calvert or other community investments? How long have you been doing social investing? And the third thing, how much of your own money is in social investing? Now, they may say yes to 1 or 2 of those, and you may go with them. But you can do it from a long distance. You can help. Green America has got probably the best one. And Social Investment Forum, SIF, what is it? Just look up USCIF, United States Social Investment Forum. And they've got resources for it too, to find stuff. It'll be much easier near metropolitan areas. It'll be much more difficult in rural areas. But like me, there are lots of people. And with Zoom now, you can see them, talk to them, all those kind of things. So those are the things, as what I'd say as far as being able to find somebody who can help you.
Andy, here's a quick question. Maybe I could answer it, but I'm not going to. The question is, what does it mean when an investment is not FDIC insured? And would someone be safe to invest in a fund like that that's not FDIC insured?
Good question. And that is like Calvert. Calvert is not FDIC insured. And there are reasons for that it's not worth our time. But Calvert's been making these loans, have made these loans with billions of dollars. They've not ever lost one dime of investor money. So the question is, you've got to check what's the track record. And that's where an advisor can help, because I can tell you, they also, just so you know, Calvert has what are called loan loss reserves. And that is they hold a good chunk of money that is FDIC insured as a backlog in case they end up with defaults. Now, FDIC insurance, like all of those credit unions that I mentioned, we talked about black credit unions and those that work, CDFI credit unions that work specifically with poor people. All of them are just as guaranteed as any credit union or any bank. It's guaranteed up to $250,000 against loss. And the other thing I'll say is some of the, like Calvert Impact Capital, has a better loss record than some of the big banks in regards to their defaults. And nobody's ever lost a dime at Calvert. And so that's part of the job I do, is to make sure all of those credit unions that we listed in the bank, we listed all FDIC insured. So it's, FDIC insured is nice, but if you're not FDIC insured, doesn't mean there's no chance that you should invest there. You just have to do some homework.
Andy, just maybe a resource question, and I hate to put you on the spot with questions like these, but what about the question of, is there a good book someone could read that would kind of steer them, give them a sense of the horizon or panorama of possibilities?
Yeah, and what I can do is, there's one that gives you a pretty wide spectrum on this. And I'm giving a plug to some people who I work with. And it's called the Resilient Investor. And it's people who are in my folks. Hang on a second. Let me see. Right there. The Resilient Investor by Hal Brill, Michael Kramer, and Christopher Peck. And this is, it's bigger than this. It's more for like a planning for your life. But social investing is in there and community investing is in there as well. And this is really a great book for just people who want, and again, I don't get anything from them for any book I sell or anything. I just have some. I'd say, Jack, I don't know if I don't feel like I can promise that I'll.
I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll put that book title and authors in our follow-up email, huh, Leela?
Okay, that'd be great. But it's a great little book. Now, there's some other ones. Jack Howes Brill has written another one too, but there are some other ones out there. And if you books on social investing, if you Google it, there are some more recent ones that you'd be able to also get some information on. Mm-hmm. So this is one I just happen to know, and I know it's good. It's a little broader than just on investing, but it's a great book because it talks about assessing your assets, but not just your financial assets. It helps you. What skills do you have? What community do you have? There's all kinds of things. It's really a very good little book if you're in retirement or moving towards retirement, to kind of help you understand that maybe you don't have as much money as you wish, but you might have a lot of other resources that will make you feel much more comfortable and I'm going to be okay.
Right. Well, Andy, I know that you and I, as old as we are, it's getting close to our bedtime, so we probably should call it a night here. But
you said
I wanted to just propose to folks who are on the call tonight. First of all, thank you for being with us. But if you have any thoughts as a follow-up about what we might do in the area of talking about the faithful use of money, if there are other topics that possibly Andy could address, or other topics related to our topic tonight that you'd like to see addressed, if you would email in response to Leela's follow-up, you'll probably do that early next week, Leela? Would that be right? If you would respond to Leela's email with just some suggested topics, we would love to follow up on tonight's presentation with other sort of related possible presentations. So thank you for that. And Andy, we can't unmute people, but we all just want to thank you. So we're going to give you a silent clap for being with us tonight. Thank you so much.
I'm waving for you.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's just good to have you with us. And I want to thank everybody for being with us tonight. It's always a pleasure. And I hope you'll take the opportunity, if you haven't already, to vote on Tuesday. And we look forward to seeing you again in November. So God bless. Thanks very much. Take care.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.